John had always loved the quiet rhythm of life on his property. Nestled just outside a small town, his land stretched across rolling hills dotted with tall pines and wide-open fields. Hunting wasn't just a hobby for him, it was a tradition that went back generations. His grandfather had taught him how to track deer quietly, how to respect the land, and how to take only what was needed. For John, it was a way to connect with nature and honor the family legacy. One crisp autumn morning, as golden leaves drifted lazily to the ground, John's peace was shattered by an unexpected letter. It was neatly typed on official letterhead. From the local Homeowners Association, a group overseeing the nearby residential area. Known simply as the HOA, the letter stated that John had been fined for hunting on his property. The reason? The association cited concerns over safety and community rules. John reread the letter, disbelief growing with each line. Hunting on his own land? How could that be a problem? The property had been in his family for decades, well outside any community. Common areas. He double-checked the property maps he had kept carefully over the years. Sure enough, the hunting took place squarely on his private land. At first he thought it might be a mistake. Maybe someone else had used his land, or perhaps the association had confused his property with theirs. But the letter made it clear the fine was real and it needed to be paid. Confused and frustrated, John set the letter aside and decided to talk to his wife, Emma. She was his rockpractical.com, always able to find the middle ground. That's ridiculous, John said, pacing the kitchen floor. I have every right to hunt on my own land. It's not like I'm trespassing or disturbing anyone. This feels like they want to control everything around here. Emma frowned thoughtfully. Maybe there's a misunderstanding. Have you called them? Maybe you can explain and resolve it. John nodded. I'll call first thing tomorrow. It's just frustrating that they'd send a fine without even asking. The next day, John made the call. His tone was respectful, but firm as he spoke with a representative from the association's office. I'm happy to cooperate, he said. But this is my property. Hunting there is legal and has been for years. Can you explain what the issue is? The representative spoke carefully. The association has rules about hunting near the residential area for safety reasons. While your property borders the community, the concern is that hunting activity might pose risks to residents or visitors nearby. John sighed. I understand safety is important. But my hunting takes place well away from any homes or trails. I always follow all safety precautions. The conversation ended politely, but without any real resolution. The association's position was firm. The fine stood unless John ceased hunting near their community boundaries. Feeling boxed in, John hung up the phone with a heavy heart. He respected the association's desire to keep people safe, but it felt like his rights were being overlooked. The land was his, and he had always used it responsibly. That evening, John took a walk along the edge of his property. The sun was setting, casting warm orange and pink hues over the landscape. The quiet woods whispered in the breeze, and John felt the weight of the letter still heavy on his mind as he walked. He noticed a trail not far from his property, winding path that snaked through the trees and seemed to be well-trodden. He had seen neighbors and hikers use it over the years. It was part of the nearby residential community's recreational area. Maintained by the Association for Residents and Guests, John stopped and looked at the trailhead, a small wooden sign marking the entrance. Something stirred in his mind. A question forming he hadn't considered before. What if he had some control over that trail? For now, it was just a thought, a flicker of an idea in the fading light. But John knew one thing for sure. He wasn't ready to give up on his property or his family's traditions without exploring every option. The next morning, John woke with the same uneasy feeling still lingering. The fine weighed heavily on his mind. But so did the idea he had stumbled upon the night before the hiking trail near his property. If only there were a way to ease the tension and find a solution that respected everyone's needs. before diving into anything drastic. John decided to try once more to talk with the association. Maybe if he could explain his perspective clearly, they'd see reason. He believed in dialogue and thought there had to be a way to work this out. John drafted a letter, carefully outlining his rights as a landowner, his commitment to safety, and his desire for a peaceful resolution. He sent it to the HOA board, requesting a meeting to discuss the fine and explore options. He hoped this time his voice would be heard. A few days later, John received a reply, inviting him to a meeting with some board members at the association's clubhouse. It wasn't the grand hall he'd imagined, just a modest room with folding chairs and a long table, but it felt like an opportunity. On the day of the meeting, John arrived early, his nerves mingling with hope. He was greeted by 3 members of the board, all dressed in business casual attire, their expressions polite but reserved. The meeting began with formalities, but soon John was able to share his story, the history of his land, his respect for hunting traditions, and the importance of his property rights. He spoke calmly and clearly, emphasizing that safety was always his priority. One board member, Mrs. Collins, nodded thoughtfully. "We understand your connection to the land, John. We appreciate your careful approach. Our concern is simply the safety of residents, especially children who use nearby areas for recreation." John acknowledged their concerns. "I get that, really. And I wouldn't want anyone to be unsafe. But the area where I hunt is far removed from homes and public paths. I'm willing to work with you on ways to minimize any risks." Another member, Mr. Diaz, leaned forward. "What kind of solutions do you have in mind?" John thought for a moment. Maybe clear boundaries, better signage, or agreed times when hunting is allowed to avoid any overlap with community activities. The discussion was civil, but despite the openness, John could tell the board remained cautious. They explained that the association's rules had been developed over time with input from many residents who wanted to ensure a peaceful neighborhood. The meeting ended with no immediate change to the finer rules, but John left feeling that he had at least planted a seed of understanding. The association members appreciated his willingness to talk, and John appreciated their concern for safety. Over the next few weeks, John stayed in touch with the board, sharing updates about his hunting practices and reiterating his openness to collaborate. Though the fine still stood, the tone had softened, and communication was more respectful. Meanwhile, John kept his eyes on the hiking trail he had noticed. He began researching property records and local listings to learn more about the land on which the trail was located. To his surprise, he discovered that the trail crossed a parcel owned by a private estate, which was up for sale. The idea that had once been a flicker now began to grow. If he could legally purchase the land containing the trail, he might gain a measure of control over the area. That control could be a way to protect his interests, address safety concerns, and maybe even open the door to more positive relations with his neighbors. John wasn't sure what the association would think, how the community would react, but he felt ready to explore this option. The road ahead might be complicated, but he was determined to find a way forward. One evening, as he sat on his porch watching the stars emerge in the clear night sky, John felt a mix of uncertainty and resolve. Whatever happened next, he knew that standing still was no longer an option. His family's land, traditions, and peace of mind depended on it. As the days grew shorter and the chill of early winter crept into the air, John found himself thinking more and more about the hiking trail near his property. It was a peaceful path, winding through groves of oak and maple, worn smooth by years of footsteps. The trail had always been a quiet backdrop to his life, something he barely noticed until now. Yet now it held a new significance. John decided to take a closer look. Early one Saturday morning, he grabbed his coat and set out toward the trailhead. The crisp air was fresh and invigorating as he stepped onto the path. He watched as a few hikers passed by, greeting him with friendly smiles. The community used this trail often. It was a place of gathering, relaxation, and simple joy. But from his perspective, the trail seemed to come dangerously close to his hunting grounds. He had always been cautious about hunting near populated areas, but the proximity of the trail now gave him pause. If the association was concerned about safety and, perhaps rightfully so, this trail might be at the heart of their worries. As John followed the trail a bit deeper into the woods, he began to observe the surroundings more carefully. The trail was well maintained with clear markers and benches placed at scenic overlooks. Signs indicated that it was a part of the neighborhood's recreational system, but John made a mental note that he had never seen any official documentation about who owned the land beneath it later that day. John sat down at his computer and started researching the property records for the area around the trail. He accessed the county's land registry online and began piecing together the information. To his surprise, he discovered that the land beneath the trail was part of a larger parcel owned by a private individual, someone outside the neighborhood association's jurisdiction. Even more surprising, the property was listed as available for purchase. The realization stirred a mix of emotions in John: curiosity, cautious optimism, and the faintest spark of opportunity. If the trail was on private land, that land was for sale. What if he could acquire it? The idea seemed bold, even audacious. Yet, it offered a potential solution to the escalating tension with the association. Control over the trail might allow John to address safety concerns, protect his hunting grounds, can create a space that respected everyone's interests. John knew the decision wouldn't be simple. Buying property was a serious commitment. One that required careful thought, financial readiness, and a clear plan. Still, he felt energized by the possibility of turning a challenging situation into something positive. Over the next few days, John reached out to a local real estate agent who specialized in rural properties. The agent confirmed that the parcel containing the trail was indeed for sale and shared details about the property's size, boundaries, and price. It was a significant investment, but John believed it could be worth it. John also began considering how he might manage the land if he bought it. Would he allow controlled access to hikers? Would he install gates or signage? How could he balance his own needs with the community's enjoyment? These questions kept John awake some nights, but he also welcomed the challenge. He had always believed in stewardship, caring for the land and the people who used it. Perhaps this new chapter was an opportunity to prove that belief on a larger scale. Meanwhile, word of the find had quietly spread in the neighborhood. Some residents sympathized with John's situation, others were unsure. But no one expected what was coming next. John knew he had to act carefully. He scheduled a meeting with his wife Emma to discuss the potential purchase. They weighed the pros and cons together, considering their finances, lifestyle, and the implications for their family. Emma, ever practical, listened intently. If this could help clear things up and protect what's ours, it might be worth it, but let's make sure we do our homework first. John agreed. Kay promised to gather all the facts, consult experts, and proceed thoughtfully. As the sun set behind the trees that evening, John felt a quiet determination settle over him. The next steps might be uncertain, but he was ready to face them. He would take control of his land and, in doing so, find a way forward for himself, his family, and perhaps even for the neighbors he hoped to work alongside someday. John spent the next several days deep in thought, weighing his options. The more he considered the possibility of purchasing the land with the hiking trail, the more it seemed like a solution that could change everything. The fine from the association still hung over him like a cloud, but this new idea gave him a sense of control, a way to protect his family's traditions while addressing the concerns that had sparked the dispute. He wasn't impulsive. Every step he took was measured. First, he revisited the property records at the county office, studying the parcel boundaries with a fine-tooth comb. The land included the trail, some wooded acreage, and a small clearing near a creek. It was Sizable enough to make a difference, but manageable enough that he felt confident he could handle it. Next, John contacted the real estate agent again and asked for a formal viewing. A brisk morning hike through the property confirmed what the records had shown. This was beautiful land with clear, natural boundaries. The trail wound gently through the trees, following the terrain as it dipped and rose. The thought that this had been open to the public for so long, yet belonged to someone else, gave John pause. He felt the weight of responsibility that came with ownership. That evening, John sat down with Emma at their kitchen table. Maps and documents spread out before them. He explained the situation and his growing belief that this was the right move. "I know it sounds drastic," John admitted, "but if we buy this land, we can manage who uses the trail. Make sure it's safe and protect the area around our home. It gives us a way to address the fine and the concerns behind it without giving up our rights." Emma considered the proposal carefully. "It's a big step, but I see your point. If you can find a way to keep everyone safe and happy, maybe it's worth exploring. What about costs and upkeep? Have you thought about that?" John nodded. "Yes, I've talked to a few people about managing the land, maybe a local caretaker or even doing some of it ourselves. The cost is manageable if we plan well, and it might even increase the value of our property in the long run." With Emma's support, John took the next step. He made an offer on the property. Negotiations began, and over the following weeks, he stayed in close contact with the seller, the real estate agent, and his financial advisor. The process was slower and more complex than John expected, with inspections, paperwork, and back and forth on terms yet. As the deal moved forward, John's confidence grew. It wasn't just a purchase, it was a statement. He was taking control of a difficult situation and turning it into an opportunity to build something better. Meanwhile, he continued to maintain open communication with the association. John sent updates, sharing his plans to buy the land and his commitment to safety and respect. The association responded cautiously, but without hostility. It seemed they were watching closely, curious to see how this bold move would play out. As the closing day approached, John felt a mix of excitement and responsibility. Ownership would bring new challenges, but also new possibilities. He envisioned installing signs, creating clear boundaries, or perhaps even inviting neighbors for controlled hikes and outdoor events. On the day the sale finalized, John and Emma stood together at the edge of their new property, the late afternoon, sun casting long shadows over the trees. The trailhead now belonged to them, a symbol of fresh beginnings and careful stewardship. John felt a surge of pride and hope. This land was more than just a boundary line or a hiking path. It was a chance to restore balance, to protect his family's way of life while embracing community in a new, thoughtful way as they walked the trail hand in hand. John knew this was only the beginning. Challenges would come, but so would opportunities. And for the first time in weeks, the future felt full of promise. The day John officially closed on the property with the hiking trail was crisp and clear, the kind of fall day that seemed to promise new beginnings. He and Emma drove out to the land early in the morning, the keys to the gate jingling in his pocket. For weeks, the purchase had occupied his thoughts. And now the reality settled in. This land was theirs. John felt a surge of responsibility as he stepped onto the trail. It wasn't just a footpath anymore, it was a boundary. A connection between his family's history and the wider neighborhood. He knew that managing it well would be key to turning a difficult situation into something positive. First on John's agenda was securing the property. He arranged for a sturdy gate to be installed at the main access point, a welcoming but firm statement that this was now private land. Alongside the gate, he placed clear signage: private property authorized, access only. The signs were respectful in tone, designed not to alienate but to inform. As the gate was installed, curious neighbors began to stop by, some with questions, others simply observing. John greeted everyone politely, explaining that the purchase was made to help maintain safety and protect the land, not to cause trouble. His calm, straightforward approach helped ease some initial tensions. Still, not everyone was happy. A few community members voiced their disappointment that the trail was no longer freely accessible. John understood their frustration and made a mental note to find ways to keep the spirit of the trail alive without compromising safety or rights. Meanwhile, John worked to develop a plan for the land. He consulted with local conservationists and land managers. Learning about best practices for trail upkeep and habitat preservation, he wanted to make sure the land would remain healthy and vibrant, not just closed off. John also reached out to the association to share his plans and to invite dialogue. He proposed the idea of scheduled supervised hikes and community events that could offer controlled access to the trail. His goal was to build trust and cooperation. The association responded, cautiously, but with interest. They appreciated John's willingness to collaborate and recognized that the new arrangement could provide a framework for safe enjoyment of the area. John's next challenge was communicating with the larger neighborhood. He organized a small meeting at the local community center, inviting residents to learn about the new ownership and to discuss possibilities for shared use. The turnout was larger than he expected, and the mood was a mix of curiosity, skepticism, then hope. During the meeting, John shared the history behind the purchase. Emphasizing his respect for the land and for the community's needs, he outlined his vision, a trail that was cared for, safe, and accessible under clear guidelines. Questions came fast and varied. Some worried about parking and access points. Others asked about wildlife and environmental impact. John answered honestly and promised to continue listening. By the end of the evening, the conversation had shifted. What began as resistance started to soften, replaced by a sense of cautious optimism. John felt encouraged. He realized that ownership was not just about control, which is about responsibility, communication, and compromise. Back on his own property, John found himself walking the trail with renewed purpose. He knew the path ahead wouldn't be without obstacles. But for the first time in weeks, he felt confident. He had turned an unexpected find into an opportunity to shape the future of his land and its relationship with the neighborhood. It was a bold move, one that required patience, openness, and a steady hand. Most importantly, it was a move that honored the traditions John held dear while embracing the possibility of new beginnings. As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows across the trees, John stood at the gate, a quiet smile on his face. The trail was theirs now, a symbol not of division, but of a careful balance waiting to be struck. The weeks after John's purchase of the trail land brought a whirlwind of activity and emotions. Though the initial tension had eased somewhat, John knew that the true test was just beginning, creating a working relationship between his family, the neighbors, and the Homeowners Association. John made a point of staying accessible. He set up a simple website and email address where residents could ask questions, share concerns, or offer suggestions about the trail and the land. His approach was straightforward and open, reflecting his desire to build trust through transparency. One afternoon, a small group of neighbors came by unannounced. They brought baked goods and a genuine curiosity about John's plans. Emma joined the conversation, adding her warm presence. Together, they listened carefully as residents voiced their hopes and worries. "We appreciate you taking the time to listen," one neighbor said. "We love that Trailit's a special place for our families. We just want to make sure it stays safe and open in some way." John nodded. "I get it. That trail has been a part of this community for a long time. I want to keep that spirit alive while making sure everyone is protected. That means clear rules and cooperation." The neighbors left feeling heard, and John felt a renewed commitment to find balance. He realized that ownership wasn't just about gates and signs. It was about relationships and respect. John also began working on practical improvements. With the help of a local handyman, he cleared brush from the trail's edges, fixed a few broken benches, and installed discreet lighting near the entrance for safety. He ordered new signage that detailed trail hours and reminded users to stay on the path and respect wildlife. These efforts did not go unnoticed. Some neighbors began sharing photos and positive comments on social media, praising the care John was putting into the land. Slowly, the narrative shifted from confrontation to cooperation. But John also knew that boundaries had to be firm. A few days later, he caught a small group of late-night visitors attempting to access the trail after hours. He approached them calmly and explained the rules again, emphasizing that the trail was private property with specific hours for use. Though some were frustrated, John's respectful tone helped prevent escalation. He offered to meet with them during the day to discuss concerns and invited them to join the upcoming community hike. Meanwhile, John maintained communication with the HOA board. Regular updates on trail management and community events fostered an ongoing dialogue. The association's stance softened further as they recognized John's efforts to address safety and inclusion. One notable breakthrough came when John and the HOA co-hosted a weekend trail day, inviting families for guided hikes, nature talks, and a small picnic. The event drew a large crowd and was a success. With neighbors mingling and sharing stories about the land, John stood near the trailhead, watching children run along the path, their laughter ringing through the trees. He felt a deep sense of fulfillment. The trail was no longer a symbol of division, but a place where connections were growing. Of course, challenges remained. John continued to navigate concerns about parking, wildlife preservation, and occasional unauthorized access. Yet each issue became an opportunity for dialogue rather than conflict. Emma often reminded him, "This isn't just about the land, it's about building trust and understanding. That takes time, but you're doing great." John smiled, appreciating her support. He knew the journey was far from over, but the progress made so far gave him hope. As the months passed, the trail became a quiet emblem of what was possible when people chose to work together rather than apart. John's decision to buy the land had been bold, but it was the ongoing effort to build bridges that truly made the difference. Standing at the gate one evening, John looked out over the trail bathed in the golden light of dusk. The balance he sought was fragile, but it was there. And with care, patience, and respect, he believed it would last. The early spring brought fresh life to the neighborhood. With trees budding and wildflowers beginning to bloom along the trail John now managed. For a while, things seemed to be settling into a positive rhythm. John's efforts to balance community, access with protection of his property had earned him a measure of respect, and the occasional smiles and nods from neighbors brightened his days. But as with any change, new challenges soon emerged. One Saturday morning, John arrived at the trailhead to find evidence of late-night activity, discarded bottles, litter strewn among the bushes, and signs of a small campfire dangerously close to dry brush. His heart sank. Despite all the care he and Emma had taken, some visitors were still pushing boundaries. He felt the weight of responsibility more heavily than ever. It wasn't just about protecting land anymore, it was about protecting the entire community. John spent the day cleaning up, recruiting help from a few neighbors who shared his concern. Together, they removed the trash and carefully extinguished any remaining embers. The experience reminded John how important it was to communicate clearly and often about rules and safety. He sent out an email to the neighborhood, thanking those who helped and gently reminding everyone about the importance of respecting the trail's guidelines for everyone's benefit. To his relief, the message was well received, but the incident also sparked a new idea. John realized that simply posting signs and gates wasn't enough. The community needed a stronger sense of stewardship, a shared commitment to caring for the land and each other. He began working on forming a volunteer group. Neighbors who would take turns helping maintain the trail, organize cleanups, and act as informal ambassadors for respectful use. John reached out personally to those who had shown interest during previous events, inviting them to join. The response was encouraging. Over the next few weeks, the volunteer group grew, made up of families, retirees, and young adults eager to help. They called themselves the Trail Guardians, a name that reflected both pride and responsibility together. They planned regular maintenance days, educational walks focused on local plants and wildlife, and community gatherings aimed at strengthening bonds. John was heartened by the enthusiasm and saw the volunteer program as a turning point. It wasn't just his land anymore, it was a shared resource, cared for by people who loved it. Meanwhile, some residents still expressed concerns. A few worried about parking congestion during popular events, while others asked about wildlife preservation. John took each concern seriously, consulting with environmental experts and local officials to ensure the trail's health was prioritized. At one meeting with the HOA board, he presented a detailed plan that included installing discrete parking, signs scheduling events during off-peak times, and placing wildlife protection measures along the trail. The board members nodded in approval, impressed by John's proactive approach. They even offered to help spread the word and support volunteer efforts. Yet not every day was easy. Occasionally, John faced pushback from people who resisted the new rules or felt excluded from the trail. He knew these feelings weren't personal, but rooted in natural reaction when long-standing habits were disrupted. Whenever conflicts arose, John made a point to listen carefully, acknowledge concerns, and seek solutions. His calm, patient demeanor helped diffuse tension, and over time, many skeptics softened. One memorable moment came when a longtime resident approached John after a volunteer day, saying, "I wasn't sure about all this at first, but seeing the care and effort you and everyone are putting in, it's changing my mind." John smiled, grateful for the small victories. Through all the ups and downs, John and Emma leaned on each other. Emma often reminded him to celebrate progress and to stay grounded when frustrations arose. One evening, as they sat on the porch watching the stars, John reflected on how far they'd come from a dispute over a fine to building a community. "Around the land, it's been harder than I expected," he admitted, "but it feels right. Like we're making something better together." Emma nodded. "And that's worth every challenge." John knew the road ahead would still hold surprises, but he was ready, with neighbors by his side and a shared commitment to stewardship. The trail was becoming more than a boundary. It was a bridge as summer approached. The trail John had purchased and carefully managed began to feel less like a point of contention and more like a vital part of the neighborhood's identity. The early fears and frustrations had gradually transformed into something stronger. A community united by shared care for the land. John often reflected on the journey that had brought them here. What began as a personal challenge navigating a fine and a dispute over hunting had become a catalyst for growth, understanding, and connection. The volunteer group, now affectionately called the Trail Guardians, had flourished. Their regular maintenance days had kept the trail clean and safe, while educational walks had brought neighbors closer to the local environment. Children learned to identify native plants, adults shared stories, and everyone developed a deeper appreciation for the woods around them. One Saturday morning, the Guardians organized a trail celebration, inviting all neighborhood families for a day of outdoor activities, games, and a potluck picnic near the creek. The event was a vibrant mix of laughter, conversation, and gratitude, a moment that captured how far things had come. John stood at the edge of the clearing watching. Families gather under colorful tents, children chase each other along the trail, and neighbors sharing food and stories. He felt a profound sense of fulfillment. Emma joined him, handing over a cup of lemonade. "Look at this," she said softly. "You did all this." John shook his head, smiling. "We all did it. The trail belongs to all of us now." Successes hadn't come without continued effort. Parking remained a challenge during busy days, but John and the HOA worked together to establish clear guidelines and encourage carpooling. Wildlife continued to thrive. protected by thoughtful measures like designated quiet zones and educational signage. More importantly, John maintained an open line of communication with everyone involved. Okay? He believed that listening was just as important as leading. And it showed. The neighborhood's attitude toward the Treyland toward John's family had shifted dramatically. Where suspicion and frustration had once taken root, now grew mutual respect and cooperation. A few months earlier, John had received a letter from the HOA president, expressing appreciation for his stewardship and inviting him to serve as a community liaison. It was a symbol of how far the relationship had progressed. Looking back, John knew the turning point wasn't simply the purchase of the land, it was the willingness to engage, to listen, and to build together. Ownership had been only the first step. The true work was in nurturing the trust and shared responsibility that followed. That night, as the stars blinked softly above the treetops, John sat with Emma on their porch, reflecting on the path that had unfolded. Do you remember how tense everything was at the start? Emma asked. John chuckled. I do. Honestly, I wasn't sure how it would end. But I'm glad it turned out this way. It's more than a win, Emma said. It's a new beginning for all of us. John nodded. The land was no longer just his property. It was a symbol of unity and possibility. The trail was a bridge, connecting neighbors, families, and friends not only through the woods but through shared care and respect. As a gentle breeze rustled the leaves, John felt a quiet gratitude. The challenges had tested him, but they had also shaped a stronger, kinder community. The future was full of promise. With the trail under careful watch and hearts open, the neighborhood was ready to walk forward together.